Block level elements take up the full width of the page. Let's take a look at a couple paragraph tags. By default, paragraphs are block level elements. I've created two paragraphs, so let's see what this looks like in the browser. Here we can see that both paragraphs, even though the content doesn't fill the full width, have filled their space. They've also been given some default margin by the browser. This separates them a little bit. By default, text itself is inline. Let's create a paragraph tag, our block level element, and put some text inside. I'll also add an anchor tag. Anchor tags in text are by default inline elements. Let's see what this looks like. Here, we have our paragraph tag, which is a block level element, and inside we have our text, which is inline, and our anchor tag, which is inline. This allows the text to flow like it might in a text editor. If I add more text after the link, this will flow as well. I've added some text after the link, and we can see that it flows normally. Let's say we have some default block level elements that we actually want to appear in line. I'll start by creating a UL with a series of li elements. By default, the browser puts these stacked vertically. Technically, they're block level elements. But let's say we want it to appear side by side. In order to control this, I can use the CSS property of display to change how they look. I'll target all of my LIs with the selector, and then in the rule set, I'll add display, and I'll set their display to be inline. Now we can see that they've stacked horizontally and are acting as though they are inline elements. The problem is that with inline elements, they are at the browser's mercy for flow. So let's say that we want to change the height of these elements. I'll set the height to 40 pixels and refresh the page. Inspecting our LIs show that they've still received the default size of 18 pixels, even though I've specified a height of 40 pixels. This is due to the default inline styling. Fortunately, we have a display type that merges the best of both worlds, and this is the inline block display. Let's change our display to inline-block and allow the browser to treat these as block level elements that are still inline. Here we can see that even though they're still stacked horizontally, they did receive the actual height that we specified. Let's add a couple more items to see how this looks when it gets down to 2 lines. I've added 2 more list items to see if this will go to the next line. And there we go. This is wrapped as usual, since they're technically inline elements. But we can see that each element still keeps in touch with the height that we've passed it. If we have a series of block level elements that we want to stack side by side, but we don't want them to be in line, and we want a little more control over how they're laid out, we can use the float property. I'll create 2 divs, float one left, and then float one right. I've created these divs, but I haven't specified any class rule sets in my style sheet. So let's see what the default looks like. Here we have normal behavior for 2 block level divs. Let's add some floating. In my CSS file, I'll target my pull left class and set the float property to left. Next, I'll target my pull right selector and set the float property to right. Let's see what this looks like. So it's taken our left div, collapsed its width to be automatic based on the content, so now we can see that it's 96 pixels instead of the 100% it used to be, and it's stuck it to the left. It's also broken the default flow of our page and taken our right div and thrown it to the right of the page. Now these styles could be achieved by other rules, so let's see what this actually does to the flow of the page. In order to see how the flow is affected, I'll add a basic inline span tag and fill it with some placeholder text. So here I've created the basic span tag and filled it with some lorem ipsum text. Let's note the changes that happen when I refresh the page. Left is still positioned to the left and right is still positioned to the right. And when I reload the page, we can see that our span tag has now flowed around our floated elements. So here we have our floated left element. Here we have our floated right element. And around it, we actually have our span tag. This is effective if we want to have text flow around an image, or maybe a description. Increasing the height of either of these floated elements will also affect the text around it. Let's increase the height of our right floated element. I've set the height of pull right to 50 pixels. And here we can see that the text has flowed around where the element is. Looking at our floated example, let's say that we want our span tag not to float around this content. Let's say that we want our span tag not to take into account these 2 floated items. This can be done using the clear property. First, I'll add a class to my span. I'll call it clear for clarity's sake. In my CSS, I'll add a rule for our clear selector. Span tags by default are non-block level elements. So in order for this to work, we'll need to be able to control its layout a bit. Let's set its display type to block. And now let's add a clear property. Let's set it to left and see what that does. Refreshing the page shows that our cleared element now sits below our left floated element, but still takes into account our right floated element. Setting this to right allows it to clear past our right element. This is the inverse of what we just saw by clearing left. However, because the right element is taller than our left element, this content never wraps around the left content. We can also change this to clear both so that all floats above it will be cleared before the content is laid out.